What's up guys, it's Will back again, and today I'm here with a big video for you all. Today I'm here to lay out my top 10 movies of summer 2017. Before we start though, let me say this summer was actually pretty solid contrary to popular belief. It's not the best summer slate of films of all time or anything, but it definitely has some winners. If we take a look back at my top 10 list from 2016, I'd argue that it was pretty solid as well, but not as good as the 2017 list that I'm about to go over in this video. What's interesting though is that 2017 did not have a great showing at the box office. If you take a look at these numbers from Box Office Mojo, you can see that the total gross dropped to its lowest point since 2004. You can probably attribute that to a number of different factors, like studios releasing big films in other times of the year, increased ticket prices, and the like, but I think the biggest issue was probably a lack of blockbuster films. There weren't a lot of popcorn flicks that came out this summer that were actually good. It was a lot of smaller stuff. They were good smaller movies, but they're still smaller movies nonetheless, and they're probably not going to make as much money as movies that have mass appeal like Spider-Man and Transformers. Either way though, let's go ahead and jump into my top 10 list because that's what you're here for. Let's kick things off with my number 10 movie of summer 2017, Mother. Alright, so Mother is a film that has been incredibly divisive thus far, especially when you take a look at the discrepancy between the critics and audience members on Rotten Tomatoes. It's not an insane discrepancy, but 22% is a fairly large margin. Regardless though, I said in my original review that Mother is more of a critics or hardcore movie lovers movie. It's not your typical summer film by any means. It was sort of marketed as a horror thriller, and it is that, but it's definitely a lot bigger than that as well. I think some people did and will feel cheated because the way this film was marketed was only really a snippet of what it really is. It's an allegorical vent session in horror thriller form, so in that sense, it's obviously not going to be for everyone. But I will say that I really enjoyed Mother overall because I feel like it executes tension and suspense really well. Those horror thriller elements are definitely still there and will definitely keep you on the edge of your seat throughout because Mother is a film that doesn't let up very often. It tries to make you feel uneasy and claustrophobic most of the time because that's what Jennifer Lawrence's character is feeling. It's very effective in that way. What kind of surprised me though was how technically proficient Mother is. I really loved how this film was shot and edited because it does a great job of relaying emotion through visuals and sound. There's a ton of tight shots that emphasize character emotions and feel cramped up to sort of up the uneasiness factor of the whole film. The sound does a great job too because there's a lot of incredibly strange things happening in this movie, and a lot of them happen off camera that you can hear but not see. So the film does a great job making you anticipate the surroundings without actually seeing them. But when it comes to the climax, you see everything, and I mean everything. This is definitely one of the most insane climaxes that I've ever watched in a horror thriller film because it is absolute anarchy and holds nothing back whatsoever. It's violent, it's scary, it's tense, and it's a scene that probably has and probably will shock and appall a lot of people. So once again, this is not a film for everyone because it will likely shock you and maybe upset you at some point. It's extremely ambiguous and rarely provides clear-cut answers to the many questions you'll have, and it takes its time setting things up. It's not a fast-paced film by any means. It's absolutely a tension-filled slow burn that does not have mass market appeal despite the actors involved. But I really enjoyed Mother, and I think it has a lot to offer the right audience. It's a film that kept me on the edge of my seat most of the time. It's well acted, it looks and sounds great, and it's unique in a time where there's not that many unique stories. From a box office perspective, it didn't do too hot, grossing a little over $14 million on a $30 million budget. But if you're into weird and ambiguous movies, I'd recommend checking this one out. It's pretty weird though, so just prepare yourself mentally beforehand. Alright, so moving on to my number 9 movie of summer 2017, Wind River. Now Wind River was one that seemingly came out of nowhere because I knew literally nothing about it until the day I went to see it at my local theater. But this is definitely one that more people need to know about because this is one hell of a crime drama mystery film. Taylor Sheridan wrote and directed this film, and the reason I bring him up is to let you know that he also wrote Sicario and Hell or High Water, two really amazing films that have somewhat similar styles, particularly Hell or High Water. Wind River reminded me of Hell or High Water because it does an amazing job at establishing the environment for which the story takes place and having that environment almost be its own character. The environment drastically changes not only how our characters move around and interact with one another, but how they go about trying to solve this crime. The area is ripe for crime due to the sheer size and vastness of the land, and of course the understaffed law enforcement, which makes solving this crime particularly difficult. Hell or High Water had a similar small character, vast landscape sort of vibe to it, and that seems to be a vibe that Taylor Sheridan obviously excels at because he can take these unique environments and make them so vital to the story that they can create a very strong setting and identity for the films. The cinematography in Wind River is very strong because it makes it very easy to immerse yourself into the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. The way that this film uses visuals to tell a story of sadness, despair, murder, and revenge is remarkable. This isn't your typical summer film either, but it is beautiful to look at despite the general darkness of the story. What I liked about this story was that it takes normal people from different backgrounds and thrusts them into this cold and unforgiving environment where they're forced to work together and solve a crime and bring closure to a family for losing their young daughter. I absolutely love the characters in Wind River because they all were not only beautifully acted but beautifully written as well. These characters, particularly the big two played by Jeremy Renner and Elizabeth Olsen, have layers to them. They have backstories that give them a stake in this case and make you as a viewer invest in their efforts that much further because of the stakes in said case. I think this is the best I've seen Elizabeth Olsen and Jeremy Renner. They're both absolutely fantastic in their roles, and they deliver characters that are easy to root for and invest in. The characters and the story as a whole has a lot of realism to it, and that really helps raise the grittiness and ultimately the drama that much higher. Wind River isn't a perfect film. It has some music and pacing issues, but even despite those issues, I think this is definitely one of the best mystery films I've seen over the last several years. It looks great, it's acted well, it's gritty and has great characters, and most importantly delivers a unique story and a unique setting. If you're into murder mystery films, this is definitely one you need to check out. It's done pretty well financially with a roughly $32 million haul domestically on an $11 million budget, so that's good. Alright, so on to my number 8 movie of summer 2017, Detroit. Detroit was a film that I was excited for primarily because Kathryn Bigelow's name was attached as director. I loved both of her big films in The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30, and when I saw the trailer for Detroit, I was definitely intrigued and pretty excited when I saw the basic plot and the cast involved. I really enjoyed the acting performances from the ensemble cast because I felt like every single actor did a really great job of getting me to invest in their character without knowing too much actually about them. The lack of in-depth character development is sort of a detriment to the film at times, but I think as a whole I really got invested in all of these characters whose paths cross in a very tense and dramatic and terrible situation at the Algiers Motel. Most of the film takes place in the Algiers Motel, and it's almost like one big long scene that just escalates and escalates until the situation eventually reaches a boiling point. What I loved about that is how tense the entire hour-long scene is. You watch the cops continually escalate the situation and basically beat the shit out of these innocent people in order to locate the believed shooter and his weapon. And the acting performances in this long scene and the whole movie really are really good. There's 3 standouts to me in this movie, and that's John Boyega, who plays a security guard who's caught in the middle of this whole mess and is just trying to de-escalate the entire situation. Will Poulter, who plays a dirty cop who is escalating the whole situation by breaking the law and interrogating a group of people who were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Al G. Smith, who plays Larry Reed, a musician who has a lot of potential but his life is in jeopardy because of the situation he finds himself in. There are other characters mixed in there as well, but I really liked how Detroit follows each of those characters and the events that transpire that lead them to the point of interest at the Algiers Motel. I feel like each character probably could have been developed a little bit more, but as a whole I really enjoyed all of these characters because when the fateful night and scene actually arrives, I felt invested enough in each of their stories to feel really scared for all the main characters, except the bad cops obviously. I also thought Detroit did a really great job with recreating a chaotic and extremely rough period in US history with the film's representation of the city of Detroit in 1967. I found myself very impressed with the movie's visual recreation and interpretation of historical events that lend itself to an experience that you can easily immerse yourself into because the environments look so genuine and realistic. Genuine and visually realistic compared to the photos and footage that exists from Detroit during the civil rights era that the filmmakers actually show you. That was a nice touch as well because it really gives you an idea of what the time was like for everyone in the city of Detroit. It was chaotic, it was violent, and the film itself does a really great job recreating the feel and anarchy of the city and time. It has a high immersion factor, in other words. Overall though, Detroit kind of didn't do so hot at the box office with a total domestic gross of a little under $17 million on a budget twice as much. It's not really the kind of film to do well overseas either since it's an American story. Maybe Blu-ray sales will help, but who knows. Moving forward with my number 7 movie of summer 2017, The Big Sick. The Big Sick, sort of similarly to Wind River, came out of nowhere for me. The first I heard of it was on the sidebar of Rotten Tomatoes when I saw it had like a 98%. It didn't actually come to my local theater at first, but when it actually did, I knew I had to go and see it and see whether it was worth the hype it was getting or not. And while I don't think it's 98% good, I still really enjoyed my experience with this film. The Big Sick is definitely a romantic comedy, but it definitely digs deeper than most in the genre have over the last decade, basically. It digs deeper because it goes into a lot of areas that most romantic comedies only dip their feet into, but don't dive head first into like The Big Sick does. This includes things like everyone's expectations of who you should be versus your own expectations, trying to find your purpose in life, figuring out whether you want to commit to something or someone when everyone around you tells you not to. There's a lot of very deep ideas and concepts that are tackled with a lot of greats in this film. And I think that's partly because this story is indeed based on the true story of Kumail Nanjiani and his wife Emily Gordon. There's weight to this story and the characters involved because it's not artificial. It's not a feel-good rom-com that's a traditional formulaic feel-good experience. It's much more than that, and it prides itself on being a refreshing take on the romantic comedy genre, a genre that's generally very predictable and oftentimes very contrived feeling. I feel like The Big Sick did a really great job of balancing comedy, romance, and realistic drama. This is something that not a lot of romantic comedies do that effectively, but I rarely felt like The Big Sick struggled in transitioning from tone to tone. I did, however, feel the film's comedian subplot is probably the weakest part of the story, and that some emotional moments are paced awkwardly and concluded a bit abruptly, but as a whole, I felt The Big Sick's balancing act between their key ingredients was one of the more impressive things I've seen from a romantic comedy in a long time. This story definitely resonated with me on a much deeper level than romantic comedy I've seen in a while, because not only were the stakes incredibly high, but this also felt like a much more genuine telling of a romance story than your typical romantic comedy film. Because of that, I actually cared and invested in these characters that all have unique ways of dealing with the primary issue that is Emily's illness and her subsequent coma. The bonding that takes place between Kumail and Emily's parents, played by Holly Hunter and Ray Romano, is easily one of the best parts of the film because of the growth that all three of them undergo over the course of the film as they grow together. That was great. And this is one very well acted movie all around. The chemistry between Kumail Nanjiani and Zoe Kazan is fantastic. Holly Hunter and Ray Romano are great together, and these four all brought so much personality to their characters that ended up resulting in an experience that felt extremely realistic for a romantic comedy, because it is. Overall though, The Big Sick was a pleasant surprise for me, and one that you should definitely check out even if romantic comedies aren't your thing. This is an R-rated, very unique rom-com that has way more depth to it than you'd expect, so for that reason you should give it a shot. And it looks like audiences gave it a shot, with it reportedly grossing a little under $43 million domestically on a $5 million budget. Lots of profits there for sure. Alright, my number 6 movie of summer 2017 is Logan Lucky. Logan Lucky was actually a film that I had high hopes for based solely off my experience with the trailer. When I saw that initial trailer, I thought it looked just goofy enough with a strong enough cast to be something special, and my high expectations for this film were definitely met because it was absolutely hilarious first and foremost, but also told a compelling underdog story with characters that have more depth to them than you probably think. This is definitely an underdog story because a lot of these characters have had some rough breaks in life and are so likable and easy to root for. I think that's partly what got me so invested in this story, was how goofy, likable, and interesting the main characters were. It also helps that the characters were fabulously acted by an awesome cast, but I think Logan Lucky succeeds in a number of different ways. Quality characters and acting are definitely near the top of the list though. But it's also really funny, and I think Logan Lucky is a very quotable film, which to me speaks low to the overall quality when it comes to the genre of comedy. I think you can point to basically any really good comedy film, and there's several quotable lines that you can easily recall because of how hilarious they are. Logan Lucky is one of those films because it contains a lot of really witty and goofy lines that are near impossible to not laugh at. It's so genuine and lighthearted that it's hard to not get wrapped up in the silliness of it all. But on the other hand, like I said, there's actually depth to this story that I really enjoyed. These characters are underdogs, and it's so easy to get wrapped up in their stories because they're just layered and unique enough to have you rooting for them throughout. And when you actually get to the heist mission, it's not just hilarious but also extremely tense, because personally I just wanted to see these characters succeed so badly that I felt a lot of stress whenever it looked like their plan was starting to go south. There's definitely some periods where the film can drag because it's not a short movie at 2 hours long, but I felt like as a whole I found myself super invested in these characters and their stories. I loved the humor and it was an all-around good time. Sadly, Logan Lucky didn't do as well as most hoped at the box office, raking in $27.5 million on a $29 million budget. Either way, go see see this movie if you still can somehow. Alright, so rolling along to my number 5 movie of summer 2017, Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman was a film that I was cautiously optimistic for. I remain cautiously optimistic because DC's recent crops of films have been average at best, if you could even say that. They're okay, but Suicide Squad is just straight up bad. Either way though, I think Wonder Woman was a pleasant surprise to a lot of people because it turned out to be a really well-crafted superhero film and DC's first big success in the current DCEU. I think one of the biggest reasons DC succeeded for the first time with Wonder Woman was the characters. These characters actually feel like they have life to them, and I think they do a pretty nice job progressing them, particularly Wonder Woman, enough that you'll actually significantly invest your emotions into these characters and into Wonder Woman's story. But yeah, Wonder Woman in particular I thought was really well written and acted. I think she's the first DC hero in the DCEU so far that I'm significantly invested in. Gal Gadot is perfect for the role and does a great job, but this isn't to say the supporting characters aren't good as well. I think the addition of Chris Pine to the cast was an excellent idea because Steve Trevor was another success in the character development department for DC and director Patty Jenkins. Steve Trevor is the opposite to Diana in many ways, and I felt like the chemistry between the two was great, and the two actors really played off one another in a way that's fairly rare for a superhero movie. In order to do a superhero movie right, you have to nail the visuals. Without nailing the visuals, you're gonna have a big problem because spectacle and cool looking action is a very big part of the genre. Well, Wonder Woman nails the action, and I feel like this was once again DC's best work thus far. The cinematography looked fantastic, and most of the battle sequences were stunning besides a few cartoonish looking displays of CGI. I also think Wonder Woman excelled in sound and score. This is one of the grittiest superhero films I've seen, considering it takes place during World War I, where our characters find themselves in trench warfare and other similar situations that are so incredibly immersive because of the excellent sound and visuals. But that action and drama was also heightened by an amazing score composed by Rupert Gregson-Williams that offered a lot of versatility and helped aid in the film's establishment of its strong identity. One thing you don't really expect from DC movies is quality humor, but Wonder Woman actually has it too. There are plenty of scenes to balance out the mostly serious overtones, and I thought all the characters each had their funny moments in a film that's not hilarious, but funny enough to provide a refreshing change of pace. It's definitely not a perfect superhero film, as I found the villain to kind of suck and the pace to be a little too slow sometimes, but it's definitely one of the better superhero films I've seen in the last 2 to 3 years. And the fans agree, considering Wonder Woman has grossed $412 million domestically on an $149 million budget. Nice job, DC, you're on the board. Alright, so my number 4 movie of summer 2017 is It Comes at Night. It Comes at Night is perhaps the most controversial film of the summer. It's controversial because it's polarizing, and it's polarizing because of the almost inarguably misleading marketing campaign that A24 rolled out before the film's release. It Comes at Night was absolutely marketed as a balls-to-the-wall horror film that contains some sort of monster or supernatural element to it that would appeal to a mass audience that wanted to go see an interesting horror film. But in reality, It Comes at Night is a much more grounded experience than anyone anticipated. It Comes at Night was not really at all what I expected, and generally when you come into a theater and you have one expectation and you walk away with something very different, you're likely going to be disappointed because those expectations you came in with weren't met. But oddly enough, I wasn't, because I was so immersed into this incredibly grounded and gripping story that I couldn't help but feel that constant tension that's ingrained in this entire experience. I gotta give credit to Trey Edward Shaw's for crafting a very unique experience that's very different from any horror film that's come out in recent memory, especially in the summertime. It's different because it doesn't rely on supernatural elements like many horror films do. No young child gets possessed and then tries to kill their family. This film is just two families living together and attempting to survive a very unique situation in isolation. And that isolation plays a big part because the house in the woods where the vast majority of this film takes place is lit and shot in an incredibly suspenseful and dramatic way. Every A24 film that I've seen has sported some outstanding cinematography, but It Comes at Night has to be near the top of the list with its long, slow zooms through the hallways and dark shots that are lit just enough to highlight the fear that our characters feel. There's also really awesome sound design and an exceptionally crafted score by Brian McGomber that add even more tension and uncertainty and suspense to the point that the experience almost never lets up. It gripped me throughout because I had no idea what was lurking just around the corner, and even within the house with the two families that become increasingly suspicious of one another. But I will say that It Comes at Night is not going to be a film that everyone will like. It's certainly not a conventional horror film by any stretch, and it's so insanely ambiguous in its overarching plotline that a ton of people are going to really dislike the artsy nature of this film. For me, I enjoyed it because it does contain some interesting ideas about fear and human nature and other similar topics, and I thought the story was interesting enough and tense enough for sure to keep me invested. I don't love how the film goes out of its way to leave basically every question unanswered, but I still loved it overall. On a budget of $2.4 million, It Comes at Night raked in just under $14 million domestically, so low budget horror can definitely still work, although this film is kind of more thriller than horror, but either way, it did decent enough overall. Okay, so moving on to my number 3 movie of summer 2017, Dunkirk. Dunkirk was a film that had mammoth expectations from basically everyone because it had Christopher Nolan's name attached as the director. Any film that Nolan directs is instantly thrust into the spotlight because of his proven track record of great artistic and financial success as a filmmaker. Dunkirk was a movie that I definitely was expecting great things from because I feel like anytime I go into a Nolan film, I'm expecting it to be this incredible experience that completely immerses you into the environment he's either built or recreated, and that's exactly what happened with Dunkirk because I found myself so invested in these soldiers' stories that I knew so little about, solely because of how amazingly crafted the entire surrounding experience was. I didn't always love how little I knew about these soldiers, but I did love how invested I felt in each of their characters because of the fantastic performances, but also just because of how disastrously beautiful the recreated battlefields were. This has to be one of Nolan's best looking and sounding films to date because I was so immersed into the violent chaos in Dunkirk and the characters almost helplessly and hopelessly clinging to any means of survival. But more specifically, I loved how fast-paced and frantic this movie is. There's rarely any downtime whatsoever to slow down and catch your breath because these characters are in the middle of a war and are trapped. This isn't a roller coaster ride, it's more like a 100-meter sprint because right from the very get-go, Dunkirk hits the pedal to the metal and never lets up. It's just full throttle from the very beginning to the very end as each of these characters tries to do their part and hopefully survive. But back to the visuals real quick. Christopher Nolan helms films that often have pretty remarkable visuals, and Dunkirk definitely continues that trend, particularly from the air, because some of the shots in this film are breathtakingly good, and there's a very concerted effort to put the audience in the character's shoes and have them feel the fear and sheer helplessness that the characters feel. The visuals and sound in Dunkirk are absolutely exceptional, and oftentimes I felt super scared too because of the extremely vivid war scenes. I felt like I was right there with the characters trying to survive. I absolutely love Dunkirk, and I think it's one of the best war films ever made personally. There's so much to like here. It's got a great cast who all perform beautifully, the sound and the visuals are great, the story is tense and thrilling, and the score is exceptional. Obviously audiences felt the same way considering the film raked in over 186 million, domestically that is, on a $100 million budget. Nolan does it again. Alright, so we're on to the final two. My number 2 movie of summer 2017 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Guardians 2 obviously had some pretty mammoth expectations of its own. After the smashing success that was Guardians of the Galaxy, Guardians 2 had a very tough job to be funnier, be bigger, more exciting, and also develop its crew of lovable misfits on a deeper level. And while I don't think Guardians 2 is better than Guardians 1, I do think that it's a really fantastic film that ranks amongst Marvel's best. I don't think there's as big of a journey, so to speak, this time around, but I did feel that James Gunn did a really great job of taking this film to develop all the characters individually and still found a way to make it exciting and fun throughout. This was definitely more of a character development film than the first one because I think it kind of needed to be. I think everyone who loved the first one wanted to know more about these characters, where they come from, and what shaped them over time. And I think that in Guardians 2, the character development department, it definitely succeeds. But I think Guardians 2 succeeds in a lot of other areas as well. I think the humor in this film is really great, not quite as good as the first, but still really good. I found myself laughing a lot at how goofy the characters and situations were, and just how silly in general the dialogue was. There is a tendency to try to be too funny every now and then, but Guardians 2 definitely delivered a brand of humor that kept me chuckling very frequently and felt right in line with the first installment. This also is easily one of the best looking Marvel films to date. I mean, I love everything about this movie from a visual perspective. It's extremely vibrant, the CGI is outstanding, it's just very colorful and fun and energetic. That's a lot of descriptors, but yeah, this movie is a visual marvel. It looks outstanding in its action, its environments, and everything in between. But what I was surprised by was how much emotion this film has. I mean, some Marvel films really hook me and reel me into the feels department, but Guardians 2 definitely struck me square in the feels. I mean, there was a lot of introspection going on with these characters, and I found myself growing even more attached to them because of what they've been through. Like I said, this is absolutely a film that made one of its primary focus, if not the primary focus, character development. Each of the Guardians, besides Drax probably, has significant development this time in this film, and that was something I loved because I grew that much more invested in them. It was great stuff. Guardians Volume 2 made just under $390 million domestically on a $200 million budget, so it's definitely another successful installment for Marvel Studios. Alright, so we finally arrived at my #1 movie of summer 2017, and this wasn't as tough a decision for me as I probably would have thought coming into the summer, but this film to me was the clear winner, at least in my book. My #1 movie of summer 2017 is It. It was a film that I was cautiously optimistic for. I didn't want to get my hopes up, but the trailers really wowed me, and it looked like Andy Muschietti was bringing a unique yet faithful touch to the Stephen King adaptation. Regardless, it succeeded beyond my wildest expectations because it turned into something much more than just a horror film. It of course has the scares that we were hoping for coming in, but it also delivers much more than that, which I didn't expect. I love the Loser Club a lot more than I expected to, honestly. I felt like it did what a lot of horror movies failed to do, and that's to deliver interesting and charismatic characters that raise the stakes because you actually feel invested in their stories as a viewer. I give some of the credit to the young actors who all did great work in this movie, and I also give credit to the writers for actually developing these kids enough to make each of their roles feel important. Something else I didn't expect from it was quality comedy. I mean, I didn't expect any comedy from it, to be honest, because it doesn't seem like the kind of film that would really excel in that department, but somehow the filmmakers found a way to mix some terrifying scares and even quality drama with some quality comedy that adds some lightheartedness to the film. It never gets in the way either. There's a lot of funny moments in the film, but I never felt upset because the humor got in the way of the scary stuff. The filmmakers were very deliberate and careful about which scenes they injected humor into, and that pleasantly surprised me. And finally, Pennywise. Bill Skarsgård knocked this one out of the park. This may just be my favorite performance of the year thus far, and I was actually a little nervous about it coming in because I felt like his version or his interpretation of this Pennywise was so different than Tim Curry's version, and I wasn't sure I'd like that. Well, let me just tell you, Bill Skarsgård was absolutely perfect for the role. He's not funny like Tim Curry was, he's just pure crazy and scary, which I loved. There's a lot of really scary scenes that are heightened by some incredible acting by Bill Skarsgård. I mean, he won't, but I think he should be nominated for an Oscar for this role. He's that good in it. And let's not forget that It is an exceptional looking film from a visual perspective. A lot of the CGI and even the cinematography looks fantastic. It's definitely the best shot and looking horror film that I've seen in a long time. But overall, as you guys know, it killed it at the box office, bringing in over $290 million domestically and still going on a $35 million budget. Sequel definitely incoming for 2019. As a whole though, this summer wasn't so bad. It had some real winners and some obvious stinkers, but that's no different than any of the last few years really. Real quick, before we wrap things up, here are some films that just barely missed the top 10. Baby Driver, War for the Planet of the Apes, Spider-Man Homecoming, Pirates of the Caribbean 5, Alien Covenant. Those ones are all very close, just barely missed out on the list. Either way, thank you so much for the continued support, and of course for staying with me through this very long video. I try to be concise, but it doesn't always work. Either way, in the comments below, let me know where you agree and disagree with me. Let me know your top 10 movies of summer 2017. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. That's all for now though. This is WillFoxification signing off. See you in the next video.